My neighbor called the police on Grandpa, and 5 minutes later, the police were asking Grandpa for help. Little Johnny couldn't believe it. Grandpa was sitting on his porch, eating a sandwich. 2 police cars pulled into the driveway. An officer walked toward him. "Mr. Johnson?" Grandpa swallowed his sandwich. "Depends. Who's asking?" The officer looked serious. "Your neighbor reported you." "For what?" "Trespassing." Grandpa nearly laughed. "I'm sitting on my own porch." The officer checked his notes. "He says you entered his garage last night." Grandpa shook his head. "I haven't been inside that man's garage in 20 years. Little Johnny whispered. "That's probably why he called the police." Grandpa ignored him. The officer asked, "Do you know your neighbor, Mr. Miller?" "Unfortunately." "What happened 20 years ago?" Grandpa sighed. "He borrowed my lawnmower. He never returned it." The officer smiled. "That's not exactly a police matter." Grandpa nodded. "I know. That's why I bought another one." The officer checked his notes again. "But your neighbor says you were inside his garage last night, at 2:17 a.m. Grandpa stared at him. "I was asleep." "Do you have proof?" Grandpa pointed toward his bedroom window. "My wife snores loud enough to wake the neighborhood." Little Johnny nodded. "That's true." The officer tried not to laugh. Then another officer walked over. "Sir, we checked your neighbor's security camera." Grandpa frowned. And the officer showed him the footage. A man entered the neighbor's garage at 2:17 a.m. He was wearing a dark jacket, a baseball cap, and something covering his face. Grandpa looked at the screen. "That's not me." "We know." Grandpa frowned. "Then why are you here?" The officer paused. "Because the man left something behind." He showed Grandpa a photograph, a small metal toolbox. Grandpa immediately recognized it. "That's mine." Little Johnny looked confused. "Why would your toolbox be in his garage?" Grandpa didn't answer. The officer asked, "Mr. Johnson, when did you last see this toolbox?" Grandpa slowly stood up. 20 years ago." The officer stared at him. "That's impossible." "Why?" "Because your neighbor says he bought it at a garage sale." 20 years ago." Grandpa looked toward his neighbor's house. Then he whispered, "He didn't buy that toolbox." The officer asked, "How do you know?" Grandpa looked at him. "Because I buried it." Little Johnny's smile disappeared. "You buried a toolbox?" Grandpa nodded. "And whatever is inside it was supposed to stay buried." The officer stared at Grandpa. "You buried this toolbox?" Grandpa nodded. 20 years ago." "Why?" Grandpa looked toward his neighbor's house. "Because what was inside wasn't mine." Little Johnny frowned. "Then why did you bury it?" Grandpa sighed. "Because someone wanted me to take the blame." The officer opened the toolbox. Inside were old photographs, a bank key, and a small cassette tape. The officer looked at Grandpa. "Do you know what's on this?" Grandpa shook his head. "Not anymore." The officer found an old tape recorder in his car. He played it. A man's voice filled the porch. "Harold, if you're hearing this, something went wrong." Grandpa froze. He recognized the voice. "That's my old business partner." The recording continued. "Don't trust Miller." Grandpa looked toward his neighbor's house. The officer stopped the tape. "Your neighbor is Miller?" Grandpa nodded. "He wasn't always my neighbor." Little Johnny frowned. "What happened?" Grandpa sighed. 20 years ago, Miller worked with me. He disappeared after our company lost a lot of money." The officer looked at the bank key. "How much?" Grandpa shook his head. "Enough to ruin both of us." Then the officer noticed something. The key had a number engraved on it, 814. He checked the old bank records. There was a safety deposit box, number 814, but it had been opened yesterday. Grandpa stared at him. "By whom?" The officer looked at the records. "Your neighbor." Grandpa stood up. "So Miller didn't find my toolbox." The officer nodded. He was looking for it. Little Johnny suddenly pointed at the toolbox. "Wait!" Everyone looked at him. "There's something under the bottom." The officer turned it over. A hidden compartment opened. Inside was a photograph. Grandpa looked at it and immediately went silent. It showed Miller standing beside Grandpa's wife. The date was 20 years ago. The officer looked at Grandpa. Did your wife know Miller? Grandpa stared at the photograph. She told me they had never met. Little Johnny whispered, Grandpa, maybe that's why she never wanted you to open the toolbox. Grandpa didn't answer. Then his phone rang. It was his wife. She sounded terrified. Harold! Don't let the police open that box. Grandpa froze. How do you know about the box? There was silence. Then she whispered, Because I was there. When Miller buried it. Grandpa stared at the phone. You were there? His wife took a breath. Harold, there's something I never told you. The officer motioned for Grandpa to put the call on speaker. His wife continued. 20 years ago, Miller came to our house. Why? He said he needed help. Grandpa frowned. Help with what? The money. Everyone went silent. His wife explained that Miller had stolen money from their company. But before he could disappear, he hid the evidence inside the toolbox. Then he asked her to help bury it. Grandpa looked at the toolbox. Why didn't you tell me? Because Miller threatened us. The officer asked. Threatened you with what? She hesitated. Proof that Harold was involved. Grandpa shook his head. I wasn't involved. I know. Then came the first twist. His wife admitted she had secretly kept one thing from Grandpa. The key to safety deposit box 814. Grandpa stared at her. You had the key? Yes. Why? Because Miller told me the box contained the evidence. The officer immediately asked, Then why did you let him open it yesterday? She went silent. Grandpa's expression changed. You knew he was going to the bank? I didn't know. The officer checked the security footage again. Miller entered the bank. But he wasn't alone. Someone was with him. The officer zoomed in. It was Grandpa's son. Grandpa froze. My son? His wife whispered, Harold! Don't blame him. Grandpa stared at the phone. Why not? Because he was trying to stop Miller. The officer looked confused. Then why did he go inside with him? Grandpa's wife finally revealed the truth. His son had discovered the old fraud and had been secretly investigating Miller for months. He knew Miller was searching for the missing evidence, so he followed him. But there was one problem. The officer checked the bank footage again. Miller left the bank carrying a small black bag. Grandpa's son never came out. The officer immediately called the station. Find my son's location. A few seconds later, the officer's phone rang. He listened, then looked at Grandpa. Your son was arrested. Grandpa's face went pale. For what? The officer answered. Attempted theft. Grandpa shook his head. My son wouldn't steal that money. The officer showed him the evidence. A black bag had been found in his son's car. Inside was $180,000 in cash. Grandpa stared at the money. Little Johnny whispered, Grandpa, that looks bad. Grandpa nodded. Very bad. Then he noticed something. The bills were all dated, 20 years ago, and Grandpa suddenly smiled. The officer asked, Why are you smiling? Grandpa pointed at the money. Because those bills haven't been printed yet. Everyone froze. The officer stared at him. Grandpa smiled. Someone made counterfeit money and planted it in my son's car. Grandpa pointed at the money. Those bills are fake. The officer frowned. How do you know? Grandpa picked up one bill. That series didn't exist 20 years ago. Little Johnny nodded. Grandpa knows fake money? Grandpa smiled. I've been married for 48 years. Of course I know fake money. The officer laughed. Then he checked the bank footage again. Miller had entered the vault room, but he never opened box 814. Someone else did. The officer zoomed in. Grandpa stared at the screen. That's my neighbor. The detective checked the records. The box was opened using the original key and Grandpa's wife's fingerprint. Grandpa turned toward her. You opened it? She nodded. I had to. Why? Because I found something inside. She pulled a photograph from her purse. It showed Miller 20 years ago, standing beside Grandpa's son. But there was another man in the picture. Grandpa stared at him. My old business partner. The man who supposedly disappeared 20 years ago. The detective asked. Who is he? Grandpa shook his head. I thought he was dead. His wife whispered, He's alive. Then the detective checked the bank records. The missing man had been making deposits into Miller's account, and yesterday, he withdrew exactly $180,000. The detective finally understood. Miller wasn't the mastermind. Grandpa's former business partner was. He created the fake money. Miller planted it in Grandpa's son's car, then called the police. The plan was simple. Make Grandpa's family look guilty while they recovered the real evidence. But there was one problem. Grandpa's son had already found the evidence. He gave it to the police before Miller could get it. The evidence proved everything. Miller and Grandpa's former partner were arrested. Grandpa's son was released, and Grandpa's name was cleared. The neighbor looked at Grandpa. I never meant to hurt you. Grandpa nodded. You called the police on me. I know. Grandpa smiled. Good. The neighbor looked confused. Why good? Grandpa pointed at him. Now I finally know who kept stealing my lawnmower. Little Johnny burst out laughing. The officer shook his head. You're telling me all this started because of a lawnmower? Grandpa shrugged. No. It started because people kept messing with my life. The lawnmower was just personal. Everyone laughed. The officer handed Grandpa his toolbox. Grandpa opened it. The old cassette was still inside. Little Johnny asked, What's on it? Grandpa pressed play. A man's voice filled the room. If you're hearing this, don't trust Miller. Grandpa stopped the tape. 20 years late. But good advice. Little Johnny laughed. Grandpa grabbed his lawnmower. Come on. Where are we going? Grandpa looked toward the neighbor's house. Home. Why? Grandpa smiled. To change the locks. Then he added, After 20 years, I'm finally getting my damn lawnmower back.